In early 2003, a team of German archaeologists working in Iraq stumbled across one of the most significant discoveries of modern times. Deep beneath the desert sands, they discovered what they believed to be the long-lost tomb of the mythical king Gilgamesh, the protagonist of the oldest story human beings ever wrote, the Epic of Gilgamesh. For centuries, historians had been divided over whether Gilgamesh actually existed, since, in the epic, he is described as a 17-foot-tall giant, a crossbreed between a normal human and a Mesopotamian goddess. For this reason, it was generally accepted that the story of Gilgamesh was simply a figment of myth. That was until Jörg Fassbinder and his team of archaeologists, using modern technology to look deep into the ground, discovered an entire ancient city beneath the desert, astonishingly laid out just as the city of Uruk, over which Gilgamesh had purportedly reigned, was described in the epic. There were houses and gardens and fields alongside an incredibly sophisticated system of canals, leading archaeologists to describe the site as Venice in the desert. More importantly, on the outskirts of the ancient city was what appeared to be a burial site, which archaeologists believed to be the tomb of the ancient king. As Fassbinder put it, "I don't want to say definitely it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the epic." What was Fassbinder trying to tell us? If the grave of Gilgamesh was similar to that described in the epic, does that mean that Fassbinder and his team had discovered a tomb with the body of a 17-foot-tall giant? It was, quite simply, a mind-blowing find, a long-lost missing piece of the origins of human history. Surely, archaeologists believed this would change everything, revealing to us secrets we never even knew we lost. But then, the unthinkable happened. Mere weeks after the tomb of Gilgamesh was discovered, the United States invaded Iraq, forcing Fassbinder and his team to abandon their work and flee the country. And the mystery was left unsolved. Or was it? In 1849, an English historian and archaeologist by the name of Austen Henry Layard made a history-changing discovery in the ruins of the library of 7th century BCE Assyrian king Ashur-bani-pal in northern Iraq, believed to be one of the oldest libraries in human history. There, he uncovered an ancient clay tablet many thousands of years old, covered in a curious script which he could not read. Who had written this script? Layard wondered. And what did it say? Incredible as the discovery was, it was only the start. Through the early 1850s, more than 15,000 fragments of similar tablets covered in the same mysterious writing were found at the site. These tablets were sent back to the British Museum, where, for decades, scholars worked at trying to decipher them, using other ancient tablets written in languages they could understand to work backwards and attempt translation. The breakthrough finally came in the 1870s, thanks to a man named George Smith. Born in 1840, Smith left school at 14 and started working as an engraver of banknotes. Though uneducated, he became enamored with news reports emerging from Iraq of strange, indecipherable artifacts older than any on record being found. Following his curiosity, Smith began to visit the British Museum during his lunch hours and spare time to study its holdings, slowly self-teaching himself ancient languages and becoming comfortable with ancient written scripts. By 1866, museum staff finally noticed a strange young man hanging about their archives, so they offered him a job. If he wanted to be a translator, they told him, he could start with the 15,000 fragments found by Austen Henry Layard. For years, Smith worked, until, eventually, the words written on the tablets began to reveal themselves. When they did, Smith was shocked to find the foundation of an unbelievable story. There on the tablets was a record of an ancient deluge, a flood that wiped out humanity save for one man and his family. When Smith presented his findings to the Society of Biblical Archaeology in 1872, at a presentation that even the British Prime Minister attended, it sent shockwaves across Europe and the world as many scholars and theologians proclaimed that this ancient flood story confirmed the truth of the story of Noah in the Bible. In 1875, Smith went further, publishing full translations of everything he had discovered. Though he did not know it at the time, he had begun to translate the oldest story ever written down, a legendary tale that would become known simply as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Tragically, Smith died suddenly in 1876 at only 36 years old, but this was not the end of what he had started. For decades, generations, even to this very day, scholars have continued Smith's work, translating more and more tablets, slowly revealing the full story of the epic. And in fact, it goes far beyond a great flood. In its entirety, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells the fantastic tale of the ancient Mesopotamian king named Gilgamesh, who ruled the area of present-day Iraq many thousands of years in the past. It describes his beginnings as a tyrant and how the gods sought to teach him a lesson by creating a rival named Enkidu. After the two men wrestle to a stalemate, neither better than the other, they become great friends and set off on a series of adventures described in detail within the epic. When Enkidu dies, a distraught Gilgamesh spends the rest of his life searching for the secrets of eternal life, a series of additional adventures again narrated by the epic. It is an unbelievable piece of written work, one which scholars agree greatly influenced the epic literary genre moving forward through history, including famous works like the Iliad and Homer's Odyssey. But what truly drew people to the story in modern times, as its translation was slowly revealed, was its description of Gilgamesh himself, the astounding characteristics of the great king. He was said to have been the child of a human man and a goddess, making him 1/3 human and 2/3 divine. As such, he had a massive physical stature, standing 17 feet tall, and was blessed with superhuman strength and endurance, as well as unusual intelligence. In fact, the story describes Gilgamesh as unsurpassed in all things. But it was more than that. Within the story was a passage about Gilgamesh, which read, "He explored everywhere the seats of power. He knew the totality of wisdom about all things." Throughout history, the search for wisdom has been something that has driven human beings forward. According to the epic, Gilgamesh had reached the end of the maze, obtaining the furthest reaches of wisdom about anything and everything. Taken together, it was these characteristics of Gilgamesh which made the discovery of his tomb in 2003 so potentially earth-shattering. Simply, if archaeologists were able to uncover his tomb and look inside, imagine what hidden secrets they might find. Was Gilgamesh really a giant? His tomb the home of a 17-foot-tall skeleton? Further though, if the tomb of Gilgamesh was opened, what records of his totality of wisdom about all things might be buried with him? What knowledge obtained while he was looking for the secrets of eternal life? Of course, these are exactly the type of secrets that people around the world would do pretty much anything to get their hands on. For the past 20 years, scholars, historians, and ordinary people have all debated the same question. Why did the United States invade Iraq? The country was not involved in the 9/11 attacks, and the official government line at the time that Iraq and its leader Saddam Hussein were hiding weapons of mass destruction has since shown itself to have been an outright lie. Some have suggested that the U.S. simply wanted control of Iraq's oil, while others even believe that the U.S. President George W. Bush simply wanted to finish what his daddy, President George H.W. Bush, had started in the early 90s during the first war with Iraq. Is it possible that there was another reason, though? Was it perhaps not a coincidence that the invasion was launched almost immediately after the tomb of Gilgamesh and all of its potential secrets had been found? Consider, as the U.S. military invaded the country, they immediately set up an encampment around the Gilgamesh site. As they did, they kicked out scientists and sent home media members who had been sent to cover the findings, including important figures from ABC News and the BBC. From the headlines of global news, the story instantly disappeared. Except, as the weeks and months passed, strange accounts began to emerge from the area. witnesses asserting that they had seen U.S. military personnel digging into the ground and removing materials from the site. If the U.S. military really did open the tomb of Gilgamesh and remove things from it, including the corpse of the great king, then the question is, what secrets were revealed to them? And what happened to that which they removed? As the U.S. military took over Iraq, the tomb of Gilgamesh was far from the only site where mysterious and inexplicable things took place. In the Iraqi capital of Baghdad stood the legendary National Museum of Iraq, one of the most important houses of human history anywhere on Earth, a repository filled with ancient manuscripts, statues, and coins, with artifacts going back through the entire history of the human race. Shockingly, and despite being warned by a delegation of scientists and historians before the invasion was launched that the museum was the single most important site in the country, when the U.S. military captured Baghdad, they left the museum unguarded for days. During this time, hordes of citizens broke into the facility and made off with tens of thousands of priceless artifacts. The astonishing negligence of the U.S. military in protecting the museum was forcefully condemned in the international community, with the president of the International Council on Monuments asserting it was no less than a crime against humanity, and at least one major media source stating that the looting was on par with blowing up Stonehenge. And yet, as the days passed, the story only got worse. Many witnesses reported that before looters ever broke into the museum, special U.S. military units had entered and carried out entire vaults filled with artifacts, loading them into heavy trucks and disappearing. Could this be true? And if so, what were they removing? And where were they taking it? Finally, the U.S. government, responding to cries from the international community, decided to send a team to investigate the site made up of specialists from the CIA, FBI, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Services. The group would be led by Colonel Michael Bogdanos, a Marine commander and lawyer who also happened to have a degree from Columbia University in classical studies. When the team arrived, they found most of the facility badly damaged. As Bogdanos later wrote, "It was not a pretty sight. It had been used as a fighting position. Iraq Army uniforms were scattered all around, as were expended RPGs. In a courtyard smoldered the remains of hundreds of Ba'ath party cards and files." Of all the positions to take up in defense, why, Bogdanos wondered, had the Iraqi army chosen such a sacred site, surely knowing that their fight was futile? There was something else, though. Something that stunned and disturbed Bogdanos and his team. As they traveled deep into the concealed underground bowels of the museum, they found that someone else had gotten there first, and while some things were clearly missing, the empty boxes and fake artifacts the museum stored alongside priceless works in order to throw off thieves had been left untouched. For Bogdanos, what this meant was obvious. It was immediately clear that these thieves knew what they were looking for and where to look. They had been, in his words, organized and selective. Oddly, the thieves appeared to have left the most valuable artifacts behind, including the world's finest collection of cylinder seals and tens of thousands of ancient gold and silver coins. If it had been looters who breached the underground bowels of the museum, then why had they not looted the most valuable stuff? If they knew what they were looking for, well then, what were they looking for? Some have an answer. During the 1920s, bizarre rumors began to emerge from Iraq, spreading from government to government through the halls of power around the world, about the discovery of an unfathomable piece of advanced ancient technology in the country. It was said to be called a Stargate, sort of a portal that allowed its users to teleport from one distant location to another. It may sound unbelievable, but in fact, Iraq was not unaccustomed to these types of rumors. In the ancient text of the Sumerians, the area's original inhabitants, stories are told of their interaction with gods called the Anunnaki, and how these gods bestowed advanced wisdom and technology upon the Sumerians, effectively founding the human race as we know it today. There are some who believe that these Anunnaki were not gods at all, but ancient extraterrestrial visitors who came to Earth many thousands of years in the distant past. The point, however, is that if Iraq really was visited by a group of extraterrestrial visitors called the Anunnaki sometime in the distant past, then the idea that they may have left behind remnants of their advanced alien technology seems less impossible. Indeed, the idea that Iraq might possess an ancient stargate was seen as eminently possible by governments all around the world in the 1920s, leading most of the major powers to send representatives to the country in order to hunt for the lost technology. In fact, there are some who believe that the Anglo-Iraqi War in 1941 was merely a front for a fight between British and German interests over control of the Stargate. Yet, no Stargate was ever officially found, and slowly the idea faded from popular view. That was until the 1980s, when a fresh round of rumors emerged claiming that Saddam Hussein had rediscovered the Stargate and, in fact, had actually begun to study it and attempt to make it functional. According to some, by the end of the 1990s, U.S. officials had become concerned that Saddam might actually be close to figuring out how the Stargate worked, which would allow him to instantaneously travel to far-off places and perhaps even contact extraterrestrials and receive their advanced alien technology. One serious scholar who believed this was Dr. Michael Salla, an Australian historian and professor at American University in Washington, D.C., who actually wrote an academic paper shortly after the invasion of Iraq, which declared that control of the Iraqi Stargate was the reason for the war. Could this really be possible? Could an ancient Stargate really have been the reason the Iraq War started? Maybe it goes even further than that. More than a decade before the start of the Iraq War, the U.S. military fought with Saddam Hussein during the Gulf War of 1991. It was during this time that an astonishing report emerged in the Russian newspaper Pravda, describing an incident that would become known as Iraq's Roswell. According to the report, a Russian colonel who was in Iraq at the time had witnessed the U.S. Air Force shoot down a UFO as it streaked across the skies. When he quickly ventured to the site of the crash, what the colonel found stunned him, as he wrote, "The aircraft was round and made of some material that I never saw myself. About 1/3 of the craft was torn out by blasts of American missiles. Saudis didn't let us touch anything, but we managed to see appliances, mechanisms, and other things that bewildered us absolutely. It was a relatively small craft of approximately 15 feet in diameter. It had 3 chairs, probably for crew members, but they were so small as if meant for children. To all appearance, space aliens were just about 3 feet tall. However, it seems incredible that there were no dead bodies at the crash site. What is more, nothing that might look like an engine was found there as well." Later, operators of Saudi radar stations told me that no ejection or falling of some subjects out of the craft was registered. Searching helicopters surveyed the desert, but the pilots failed to find any surviving crew member close to the crash site. If the colonel's story was true, then an obvious question arises. Where had the craft's pilots gone? Moreover, where was its engine? Is it possible that these things had been recovered by the Iraqis before Russian, Saudi, or American representatives arrived at the site? And if so, what had they done with them? It wasn't until late 2002 that a caller to an American radio show claiming to be a military insider provided an answer. Iraq had indeed recovered things from the crash site and were, in fact, attempting to reverse engineer the alien technology. According to the caller, the U.S. government believed Saddam's scientists were coming close to a breakthrough and that they must be stopped before they achieved it. A few months later, the U.S. invaded Iraq. Is it possible that this was the true reason for the Iraq War? Could reverse engineer technology be what the U.S. military removed from the National Museum of Iraq before looters were let inside? Perhaps weapons of mass destruction was actually a code word for alien tech, And the US government was not lying about its intentions after all. Regardless if this is true or not, the fact remains. Whether the Gilgamesh's secrets of the
what they've been doing for a while is going to, Iraq, which is actually Sumer. There is information and ornaments and the spoken word, because when they say the spoken word, it just means a certain frequency, which is the frequency that holds this together. They were attacking to go to the museums to find that out. Yes, absolutely.
Like Saddam Hussein?
Well, he had technology. He had hold of technology. He had hold of Stargate technology. That's one of the reasons why he was at one point, he was one of the most powerful men on the planet. And the technology that he had was off the charts.
Now, this is very similar to what John Irwin has said in his book, One Step Beyond the 16.
Yes, yeah.
Amongst other things.
Yes, he had that. It's sort of similar to there's a movie called Contact, and that spinning thing there, which is able to shoot you through to different dimensions. So he had something similar to that. There's a few of them around, but he had control of that.
You do whatever you want. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
And, something's wrong. It's a whole world of deceit. We're going into Iraq to get artifacts? Not to get anything but artifacts. That was the most important thing, they said.
But which artifacts?
I don't know. They just said artifacts. There were things in Iraq that were so old that we had to go get. And Bush wanted those artifacts. It was very important.
Did we get them? And if so, where did they go?
We got them. They said they got everything they needed from that country.
Where is it?
I don't know. We have it. Like, you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant type stuff. Weapons like that. It's a weapon. Supposedly it has the power to kill, and you're not supposed to look upon it or anything.
But the man who was talking about this never used any phrases like Ark of the Covenant.
Never. He just said artifacts. Ancient artifacts that were so important, we had to get them, and we got them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got them.